Hey everyone, it's Theo from Spectrum Gardening. So as the weather's warming up in the Fraser Valley, we're starting to think about transplanting our seedlings outside into our soil. But however, before we do that, we need to talk about fertilizer. And we need to talk about kind of the role it plays with our plants. So I'm not going to go into such a detailed scientific explanation into each fertilizer and into exactly what it does with the plants. I'm going to cover the basics in layman's terms, I'll be covering a little bit of information about an incomplete fertilizer, a balanced fertilizer, a synthetic fertilizer, and an organic fertilizer, and also the role of what nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium does with the plants. What is nitrogen and what does it actually do for your plants? Well, nitrogen, what it does is it pushes out your leaf and your stem growth. So if we're looking at a plant like this, we're looking at the leaf and we're looking at the stem right here. That's what nitrogen's doing. It's basically encouraging the plant to push out new growth. So if I grab this branch right here, we can basically see that this along here, from this green all the way down here, that's new growth. That's basically what's being pushed out. Phosphorus. What does it actually do for your plant and why is it actually important to have it in your soil? Well, to say it plainly and simply, phosphorus is going to help you produce bigger and better roots. If you have a flowering plant or a plant that produces fruit or berries, it's also going to help you produce bigger and better flowers or bigger and better fruit and berries. So the last letter in the fertilizer, K, potassium. What is this actually going to be doing for your plant if we've already covered the growth of the plant, the new growth, the leaves and the stems, and we've already covered producing fruit and roots? Well, potassium is basically for overall health of your plant. I showed you this fertilizer a little bit earlier, so let's talk a little bit more about it. This is a synthetic fertilizer and it's water soluble. So what you'd basically be doing, you'd be taking the fertilizer just like that. It's blue, it's obviously not naturally made. And you'd be dissolving it in your watering can and you'd be using it to water your pots or if you're a synthetic fertilizer grower, you'd be using it to water your garden beds with. So why do you use synthetic versus organic? Well, synthetic, what it's basically going to be doing is making your plants immediately look bigger and better. It's going to push out your growth right away versus organic. However, it's going to actually be harming your soil in the long run. It's going to be killing your bacteria. It's going to be killing your microorganisms. It's going to be killing your ecosystem that you have living in your soil. So myself, our family, and our company, we grow as organically as possible. We don't use any chemical fertilizers on the ground. We don't use any chemical fertilizers in our garden beds or anything like that. That being said, we do use them in hanging baskets. Why? Because there's no ecosystem in the hanging basket to break down organic granular fertilizer. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. Because there's no ecosystem in that basket to break down organic granular fertilizer, we use synthetic to get the immediate results and to keep the plants, kind of the flowers, annual flowers, to keep them blooming and alive throughout the growing season in our climate. In the same breath, I mentioned that myself, our family, and our company believe in growing as organically as possible. However, we use synthetic fertilizer for hanging baskets. So how does that work? Well, let me explain to you how that works. So yes, we believe in growing as organically as possible. We don't add any synthetic fertilizers to the ground. We don't use any synthetic fertilizers in our garden beds whatsoever. We only use it in our hanging baskets. That's it. That's the only place that we use synthetic fertilizer. So why would we only want to use it in hanging baskets versus the ground and the soil? To say it plainly, the soil is a living thing. It's got microorganisms living in it. It's got worms, it's got bacteria, it's full of life. And as soon as you start adding synthetic fertilizers to it, you're going to start killing off the life that you have in your soil. Yes, your plants are going to immediately look bigger and better, but you're actually going to be damaging your soil and your ecosystem overall in the long run. And in the long run, you're actually going to be left with very poor soil. So when you're using organic fertilizer, what's going to be happening is that you're actually going to be feeding the soil first. You're going to be feeding the bacteria. You're going to be feeding the microorganisms. You're going to be feeding what actually lives in the soil versus your plant. So why would you want to do that versus just feeding your plant directly? Well, it's different views, different heads of the same coin, right? Some people want to grow synthetically, some people want to grow organically. We want to grow organically. We want to take care of the land, we want to take care of the soil. That being said, organic fertilizer does take about 3 weeks to break down. You will not see immediate effects in your plant, unlike synthetic fertilizer. So you'll apply it and you'll kind of walk away, and then while you're kind of walking away, it's going to start breaking down and the soil is going to become healthier and it's going to be becoming much more alive versus using a synthetic fertilizer. Organic fertilizers will be containing natural sugars, they'll be containing natural enzymes, things that we just can't simulate in a lab. And those natural occurring enzymes and sugars will be feeding your soil. And in the long run, you will have healthier and better plants versus using a synthetic and you're getting instant results. Let's talk about an incomplete fertilizer for a moment. So why would you want to use it? What purpose does it have? Well, earlier in the video, we mentioned about putting bone meal in a hole. So this one right here, you can see it's 080. It only has a second number in it. It only has phosphorus. So this is basically a bone meal replacement. But the benefit of this one is it's made out of soft rock phosphorus and is made out of bad guano. So it will not attract animals to your garden, unlike what bone meal does. So the reason that you'd want to be applying phosphorus in the hole when transplanting something and not per se completed fertilizer is because if you have a young shrub or young tree, you want to get it first focusing on building a nice big root structure so it can be held into place, so it can kind of anchor itself versus pushing out a lot of new growth initially. And the thing that can also be said, let's say for mature fruit trees or mature berry trees. Once like berry trees or fruit trees are mature, you don't want them continually pushing out new growth. You want them to be focusing on fruit production or berry production. So you want to be feeding them a higher phosphorus blend, something that's going to be helping them produce more fruit and berries versus more growth. Let's take a look at another incomplete fertilizer. So this one right here, 1105, it has 11% nitrogen, 0% phosphorus, and 5% potassium. So why would you want to use this on your plants? Well, let's say you're growing garlic and you want to be pushing your nitrogen quite a bit so it can bulb up. This would be a great choice for it, or another fertilizer that has a very high nitrogen content. Or let's say you're growing collards or kale or things like that, there's no flowering or there's no fruiting on the actual plant. You're just wanting to grow your leaves. Well, a higher nitrogen fertilizer would be a great choice so you can push out all that green growth. This blend here contains 6% nitrogen, 2% phosphorus, and 7% potassium. So while it's complete, it's not balanced. But we actually use this blend as our general purpose, all-purpose blend early in the spring. So why would we want to do that if it's not complete, if it's not balanced, if it's doesn't have the same number of potassium and phosphorus and nitrogen in it? Well, simply said, because earlier in the season, we want our plants to kind of grow. But kind of midway through our growing season, we taper off using the 627 and we switch to using 080 for our fruiting veggies, like our tomatoes, our cucumbers, our eggplant, and our peppers, because we want them to focus on fruit production versus growth. One thing I would like to point out is homeowners or hobby growers or home gardeners, they tend to use anywhere from 1/3 to 50% more fertilizer than farmers do. So why is that? Are we growing better veggies than farmers? Are we growing bigger veggies than farmers? Do we know something that they don't? It's actually quite the opposite is true. Farmers know things that we don't. So let's break that down for a second. So why are farmers using less fertilizers than homeowners? Well, to say it plain and simply, the farmers are going to be looking at their fields and they're going to be calculating the cost of input per acre. The cost of input is cost of seed and cost of fertilizer, and fuel and time and labor, of course. So the more inputs that they have to put into the field, the more per acre that crop is going to cost them. So essentially they want to be inputting as little as possible. So how do they do that then? So to say it simply, they go test their soil each year. They would take soil from throughout the field, different samples, they'd mix it all together and they'd send it off to a lab. and the lab would send them back a report. It would send them back a report saying what their soil actually contains, not just NPK, what we've been talking about, but it'll also tell them about iron content, sulfur content. It'll talk them about zinc, about magnesium. It'll tell them all things like that. And the lab and the scientists in the lab will tell the farmers what they actually need to apply to their soil if it's deficient or depending on the type of crop that they're growing. Most homeowners, what they'll do, they'll just blindly add fertilizer to their garden. And you know what? That may work for some people. It really does. And I'm not going to say that they don't see results. But if you're blindly tossing fertilizer on, let's say, your garden beds or in your in-ground garden, well, you're basically just throwing money into the soil. That's what it basically is. You're buying fertilizer and you're just throwing into the soil. So what farmers like to do, they'll test their soil so they don't need to fertilize unnecessarily. We actually test our soil too. All the soils that we sell to our customers have been tested so they know exactly what it contains and what nutrient levels it has in it. That's one of the reasons why it's really important to know what your soil contains in the form of nutrients. So I'm not saying go out and test your soil every year, but I'm saying, once every couple of years, take a couple samples from different beds and send them off to a lab. Those home kits that they sell in garden centers or big box stores that basically you take your soil, you add water to it, it's basically like playing with colored water. It's not going to give you a very accurate or clear answers to what your soil actually needs. The big garden beds that I've built out in our yard, they're 4 by 12. So they're roughly 48 square feet or so. So that bag of general purpose that I showed earlier, that would cover 2 of my garden beds. That would cover one application, 2 garden beds. So when I say one application, I mean during the growing season, since it takes about 3 weeks for an organic fertilizer to break down, you want to be applying it every 3 weeks. That's partially why I said you want to apply it before you actually put your plants in. So it kind of gives a jump start on the soil. So every 3 weeks in the growing season, you want to be going out and applying organic fertilizer. And then during that application time, if you have fruiting varieties, if you have fruiting plants or flowering, you want to be easing off the nitrogen and you want to be adding more phosphorus so you can help your plants focus on that. So I've weighed out enough fertilizer to cover 50 square feet. I'm not worrying about the 2 extra square feet that I have supposedly in this. It's not going to be a big deal at all, despite me saying earlier in the video you can harm your plants. Yes, you can get a huge buildup of nitrogen or a huge buildup of phosphorus, which can affect your plants. But you know what? 2 square feet of extra fertilizer, it's not going to do very much. Not at all. When I was sprinkling the fertilizer, I wasn't super careful to try and make it totally even. So if we take a look over here, you can see that there's fertilizer sprinkled here, but not so much over here. There's more over there. Like I just kind of generally just broadcasted it everywhere. I just basically essentially top dressed the soil. What I could do if I wanted to is take a rake and just kind of gently scratch the top of my soil. Not turn it or till it or anything like that, but very gently just go down like maybe about this much and just kind of scratch the fertilizer in. I could do that if I wanted to, just to kind of work it in a little bit. But what I could also do is just leave it straight on top, just like this. And it will eventually kind of be worked into the soil. If I was applying fertilizer to a bed like this later on, or to a bed like this now that has plants inside it, because you can take a look, this bed is pretty full. I've got broccoli planted here, and around the broccoli I've got leeks planted. So it's going to be pretty hard to actually scratch the soil. I would just basically gently broadcast the soil, and if I could get in with a very narrow tool, I would scratch it a little bit, and if not, I would just kind of forget about it. I would just kind of do it as that, and I would water the bed, and nature will take care of the rest. I just wanted to show for a moment the difference between the beds. This bed I've prepped. I've raked out the soil so it's level. I've fertilized it. It's all basically ready for planting. planting. It's all good to go. This one, however, well, you can see it's not so ready. I've got a little bit of weeds growing back there, and let's take a look at the soil quickly. You can see how the soil is kind of sloped towards the middle. That's because I overfilled the bed in the early spring, late winter. I overfilled it, and I overfilled it purposely because I knew it would settle quite a bit. If we look at the edges right here, the soil's gone quite a bit down. And I did the same thing with all my beds. And when I raked out this bed, the soil level was actually perfect. It's actually still a little bit high in spots, but I know by the time it end of this growing season, it's actually gonna break down even more, and I'll need to top it up again. However, let's go back to this one. So this bed here, you can see it's got some weeds in it, and you can see it's got some stuff growing in it. So before I'd actually want to fertilize, I would want to come in and take out all those weeds. I'd want to rake it out so it's nice and level, so I can get a more even distribution, so I can distribute the fertilizer a little bit better. And then I would want to fertilize. And then if I really wanted to, again, I could rake it out, I could rake it in, the fertilizer, and just kind of get it worked in a little bit better. Thanks for watching. And of course, if you have any questions or comments about something I showed you or talked about in this video, throw them down in the comment section down below and I will answer them. I hope this video was informative and kind of explained kind of the base knowledge of how plants use nutrition and how to apply fertilizer and the benefits of synthetic versus organic. If you did like this video and it was helpful, give us a thumbs up. And make sure to subscribe to our channel to see more.